Well, it's a new trilateral security agreement with a set of measures accompanying it between the three Anglosphere democracies of the United Kingdom, United States, and Australia. Now, that's the literal answer. I think the symbolic answer is more important, and that is for the decades now, we've said two things, and successive leaders of both major political parties and groupings have said it, and that is we don't have to choose between our history and our geography. I think AUKUS represents a choice to the extent that it brings our history to bear upon our geography. Because while our geography is constant, the geopolitical environment in which we operate is in a state of rapid flux, and AUKUS is an answer to that. Secondly, we've said we don't have to choose between China as our major trading partner and the United States as our major security partner. I think we have now made that choice quite decisively in favor of the United States. And therefore, if you put the two together, this will have significant ramifications and consequences over the next 50 years as we readjust to the United States and to a lesser extent, the UK, recalibrating from the North Atlantic to the Indo-Pacific as the emerging center of geopolitical context in the next few decades.
So what is the intended effect geopolitically with this?
The intended effect, well, it's a recognition of the pivot from the North Atlantic to the Indo-Pacific as the center of geopolitical contest. Second, in a sense, it acknowledges the waning primacy of the United States as the unchallenged and unchallengeable hegemon under whose leadership the post-1945 liberal international order was constructed, and under whose authority the different dimensions of that order were policed. The United States now clearly recognizes that it's no longer going to be able to do that on its own. For us, that puts our whole security umbrella under stress, if not under question mark. And this is an answer to that, because we now become very definitely, I think, the southern anchor of that new geopolitical contest. It's a recognition that China is a far more formidable multidimensional competitor than the old Soviet Union ever was. My colleague at the ANU and the former Deputy Defense Secretary, Paul Dibb, famously argued back in the 80s that the Soviet Union was an incomplete superpower or a one-dimensional superpower. It had military might backed with a sizable nuclear arsenal, which it still does. But other than that, it didn't have the other attributes of great power. By contrast, China is a comprehensive national power. Now, the problem is twofold on that. One, China's historical, literary, and philosophical tradition and legacy is that of the Middle Kingdom, with a group of tributary states around it that acknowledge its supremacy and pay tribute to it and kowtow to it. So it doesn't have a tradition of operating as one great power in a system of other great powers. Nor does it have a maritime power tradition. It's been a formidable continental land power. But now its interests are increasingly global, and it needs the ability to be able to police its secure lanes of communication all around the world. So that's one side of it. The other side we tend to forget because we don't look as critically at the United States for obvious reasons. And that is that the United States too doesn't have a tradition of operating as a great power in a system of great powers. The European great powers have that, the US doesn't. And for the first time, it's having to readjust to the reality of a multi-dimensional peer competitor. Now, the US is militarily still streets ahead, but its ability to destroy an enemy in war has not been matched for the past 2 decades or so by the ability to bring about a post-war transition to a peaceful order built in its image. And the Afghanistan shambolic withdrawal is just the latest example of that. There are others as well. So that is the geopolitical world in which we are having to readjust. And having made our choices, we then have to embrace the technology that goes with it. And the reality for us is we operate as an isolated continent of the Anglosphere with the gravitational pull of Asia. And I want to come back to that because there's a lot of misunderstanding about that. But we have a 3-ocean, Antarctic, Pacific, and Indian, vast maritime space. And for that, nuclear propulsion actually makes a lot of sense. Doesn't mean that there are no question marks and no worries. But compared to diesel electric alternative, nuclear propulsion and the pathway to nuclear propulsion makes a lot of sense. But then, of course, we don't have a civilian nuclear industry. And so we need the assistance with all the accompanying collateral assistance in that from our allies. So that is an important part of it. Just on the Asian gravitational pull side, you could say there's an oddity about 3 white men from 3 Anglosphere countries saying they're going to take charge of Asian affairs. And there is an element of that, and this has been perceived like that in the region in some countries. But I think the reality is AUKUS as the alliance with military teeth from our point of view, but also from the American point of view, has to be complemented with an acknowledgement of the Quadrilateral Dialogue Forum as well, which takes us much closer to India and to Japan as major Asian democracies. So I think it's an unfair characterization to say this is simply nostalgia for the lost world of imperial Anglosphere, because it's both. It's the Quad by its nature and by its limitations will never have the sharp military edge to it. Japan wouldn't want it, India wouldn't want it, even if we did. And therefore, in a sense, it complements that. Similar to the way that you have both the European Union and NATO in the North Atlantic.
We've just had an audience question come in, and touching on what you said about the different leaders, do you think the AUKUS deal would be different if Donald Trump had been president of America?
Well, now I should make clear, I've never held national government position in any country, let alone some of the sensitive portfolios, including defense. So my understanding is that of an informed observer from the outside who follows these affairs. Now, my understanding is that these discussions were initiated by Prime Minister Morrison about 2 years ago. So that would have been the Trump administration. Things have changed. It's Trump more than anyone else who pivoted from China as a potential partner that we are going to assist building up its economic capabilities in the expectation and hope that economic liberalization would in due course lead to political liberalization. It's Trump who pivoted from that to identifying China as the major strategic competitor. And he was very explicit about that. And President Biden comes in with some allegations about his previous links to the Chinese regime. And in a sense, with the world having changed around him anyway, he carries on from where Trump left off. So that discussion began at that time. Technologies have moved on quite dramatically, even from the time that we entered into the deal with the French 5-6 years ago. And so I'm not sure that it would have been necessarily different. But to my mind, the more important question which arises related to that is to what extent can we be confident after the transition to Trump and then from Trump? To what extent can we be confident of continuity in Washington? Because their foreign policy and defense and security policies are now becoming hyper-partisan as well. And we need to be careful of that from our point of view.